Hey everybody, this is Ken, and we are in my garage. We are working on the 46 Ford. Today I wanted to do a throttle pedal for it, actually because my throttle pedal cable came in. But in keeping with my budget theme, I wanted to use the original throttle pedal, and I didn't want to spend a lot of money building anything. So originally this thing was a lot longer, didn't have threads, this bar was on it, and it kind of fashioned in this position in the truck. The bar was held, this ran through a bar, excuse me. It was bolted to the firewall, and that part was all rusted away and broken, so I couldn't use it. But anyway, I cut this piece off because I was just going to use the pedal. And I needed a way to mount this on there, so I built this. I don't know if you can see that well, but this is just a piece of square tubing. It's got a 1-inch bearing in it that you can get from like Tacoma Screw or a hardware store or whatever. A bearing on each side, 1-inch piece of strap, and I just drilled some holes in it that matched pre-existing holes on my firewall. This hole was just in the piece of square tubing I had, so it's just all scrap. So really cheaply, I TIG welded actually in place the bearings just to hold them there. And the throttle pedal then simply passes through. It'll be on the firewall in this fashion. Now I need an arm on this side to operate my throttle cable. So again, I took a piece of scrap, that's a 1/2 inch by 1/8, and I TIG welded it to a nut and drilled a hole. You'll see what that's for later. But why did I put a nut on this end and not just weld it here? Because I didn't know the angle I needed. So with threads and a second nut, hope this is all coming through decently. Now I can adjust my angle, keep it in place with the nuts on this side, and bolt this on the firewall and take a look at what I've got for movement. I know by measuring the throttle movement on my carburetor that I need at least 2 3/4 inches of cable movement. And I don't want my throttle pedal sticking way up like this off the firewall or way down here. I want it right about where my foot will sit on it nicely, and this will get a good pull. And truthfully, that is right about at that angle. You don't want this hole here, the pull against your firewall, you want that to be as straight as possible. You don't want it pulling down or up. And as your throttle pedal comes down, you see this hole is also moving down, so now my angle of pull is changing. So it's critical that you get this in the right place and this hole in the right place. That is why I've made it threaded, so I can adjust it, lock it in, and test it. Now the hole I can just drill new holes, and once it's at the right length, I'm just going to cut this off. So that all should work out pretty good. Now the reason I'm doing all this now instead of the wiring, which is all over the place, is because my throttle cable showed up. This is just a fairly cheap black coated throttle cable. It's got a clevis end for my pedal, that's why the hole's there. This clevis will go through it. It's got a connection end for the carburetor. That's awesome. It's all cut to fit, it's very long. And that was one of the issues with this end. This end, right here where these threads are, was long. It came way up, almost probably 5/8 of an inch longer than it is now. And that meant that when I bolted this to my firewall, this part was way out here. And that space takes up a lot of the room for this lever. And I want this lever as close to the firewall as I can get it, so I shortened this piece right here. Simply cut it with a cutoff wheel. Then you need to make sure this hole is really smooth. So get yourself a very small file, or possibly if I can get it out of the box, a chamfer bit. Now these are really nice. They're simply for chamfering holes, making a smooth edge, and I just stuck it in there, and this is very soft metal. With my fingers, I twisted it enough to get a taper. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a nice smooth taper. Cable moves in and out very nicely, can come at an angle because of the chamfer there, the taper. So when that hole changes its position, I won't be abrading my cable. That's really important. A lot of people, buy these and then rate them terribly because they eventually break. Well, if you don't chamfer your holes, it's going to wear, it's going to break. So this is cut to fit, and I am going to cut this tube down and cut the cable down, but I'm going to leave it a little extra long because right now it's got a single 4-barrel on it on a pretty low-rise manifold, but it's going to get a tunnel ramp. So this is going to be adjustable, but I'll take you to the truck. I'll show you how everything goes on. All right, we're at the truck here. I've got the throttle cable through the firewall, and I've got it bolted in place, and this is exactly what I wanted. I wanted this ferrule to be flush with the nut or fairly close, so that's about perfect. So then the cable is going to go through. Still hasn't been trimmed to length. Right about there. The throttle pedal, sorry about all the wiring in the way here, but you don't want to get started on something, I get part way through it, I get bored with it, and then I do something different. And then I go back to it. That seems to be the way of it in my garage. All right. Now this is where the throttle pedal is going to be, and I can now see where the cable is going to be at its furthest end point. Now I can adjust where my rod is going to be in relationship to the cable. Now in order to have it in the position I've got it now, that's a little too high, but thankfully I've got it on threads, so I can put it where I want it, and that's about right. Now when I step on it, I'm going to get movement out to here, and you can see how the angle changes. Maybe I'm hoping from that angle you can, probably not, but it goes down just a little bit, but just about perfect. And it's looking like I will have the necessary amount of movement. So I am going to bolt the pedal down, put the clevis in here, and find out. But that made it easy being able to move this arm. My guesstimate was a little bit off of where I wanted it in the first place, but this right here should be perfect once everything's in place. We'll find out. I'm going to tighten these up so that this doesn't move. I'll get it all mocked up on the inside here, and then I will test it, and if it's right, I will TIG weld this nut to the shaft, and we'll be done with the throttle pedal. I got to put a spacer in here though. The reason for the spacer in here is to prevent my throttle pedal from moving that way, because right now it can slide back and forth a 1/4 inch. So this looks good for now, so I'll show it to you when we're working on the carburetor end of it. Hey, I know you can't see me, but I wanted you to see this down here. This right here is what this cable goes into. So it's important when you mount it on your carburetor to test fit things that you put it in the middle of its travel. I can screw this in another 1/4 inch, or I can back it out a 1/4 inch. That's important because if I screw up a little bit on my placement and my cable length, I can make that adjustment and correct it. So this is important to have this right. Now my cable is too long. You see that? But I'm going to do that. And the reason I'm doing this is because there's going to be a tunnel ram on it. Oh shit, I got the radio playing. Don't freak out. All right, I know you can't see me, or at least my face, but you can see my hands. Hi. We're in Ken's garage still, working on that throttle cable. And I wanted you to see this portion right here. Now this is the portion the cable sticks into right here. And I've got it in the middle of its adjustment. I can bring it that way, a 1/4 inch more, maybe a little more, and that way, probably about the same amount. I got it right in the middle of its travel. The purpose for that, the reason is, that if I make this cable too long or too short by just a little bit, I have that movement I can do. It's not so important for this part of the cable, but for the strands that come through and goes on to my throttle up here, it's a big deal. So it looks like it's way too long, but because this motor is going to get a tunnel ram eventually, I'm going to leave it long. I'm just going to throw in a big old loop like that so we can get it broken in and make sure everything's working right before I go to the trouble of putting a tunnel ram on it. And then we'll be good to go. So I will show you this side momentarily. I forgot to tell you, I cut this black cable just with a cutoff wheel. It's super easy. I just put it in my vise. Took about 5 seconds to cut through it, maybe less. And it's good to go now. So I stuffed it in here. I'm in halfway, half of my adjustment here. I put the carburetor end on the carburetor linkage where I want it to go. It actually didn't fit in the hole. It's a 3/16 stud, but that hole is a tiny bit. I had to drill it out. No big deal. All right, now what I'm looking at is I have the cable pulled tight. I'm looking at the length it needs to be when I insert it into the here. This I want pretty close, but if I mess up just a bit, you know, like a 1/4 inch, I have the adjustment here now where I can lengthen it or shorten it. That's important to do. So I'll get a marker, we'll mark this, and I'll cut it. We'll be done. Oh, another good tip before you cut it. Put some resin on it and a little solder. It won't unravel. Tech tip. Didn't mean to run off, but I had a silver marker, and that's not going to work on a silver cable. Got a black marker. That's me. All right. I take a look in here, and I see just about how deep that cable is going to go. It goes just past the set screw, not very far at all. So let's put a mark. All right, I have a mark on my cable. It's a tiny bit longer than I think it needs to be, which is good. Longer is better than shorter. I'm going to go put a little solder on that so it doesn't unravel when I cut it. And then I'll just cut it with my cutoff wheel. Be good to go. You'll see that in a moment. All right, so it's cut to length. A little solder on it. I've actually wiped the whole cable down with a little bit of lithium grease because I'm hoping this is the last time I take it in and out. Actually, it probably won't be, but it's going to be close. So I'm going to put it in. All right, get it in the hole. All right, so I got the cable through, but you might notice something a little different. It's chrome. It's black now. The reason for that is I was having trouble feeding the cable through the back black coated line, so I've swapped it over to this one. I'm not a fan of braided stainless, but it does the job. So we fed it through. I've locked down this lock nut. Let me bring you in here. All right, so I fed the cable through here, locked down the little Allen screw. Now this is where I make my adjustments. If there was slack, I've actually already adjusted it, but by moving this back that way, loosening this one and tightening this one, it tightens up the cable here. And doing it the other way loosens it. So if I'd cut it too short, I'd have brought it in this way. And that all works really pretty well right now. Remember, the big loop here is because I'm putting a tunnel ram on it later. Let's look on the inside. You'll see a whole ton of wires, which is what I was doing and what I'm going back to. But let's look at the throttle pedal itself. All right, here's our throttle pedal right there. Comes up. There's where it's mounted to the firewall. Here's the arm. And right there is the hole that I put in it. And it's almost flush against the firewall there, which is where I wanted it, because I wanted the pedal right about here. It could actually be up a little higher. I may actually bend the pedal up a little bit more. It's a little bit low compared to the gas pedal, but that's all right. But it does function. It could spring back a little easier, and I would probably like it to do that. I don't have a return spring hooked up, so once I get that done, I don't have a return spring on the pedal. Let me put it that way. There was one up on the carb. Maybe it'll come back better. Maybe it'll come back with the work. It's going to be on here for a while before this is actually running, so I'll probably work it for quite a bit. And we'll see how it works out. If it doesn't work out, I'll shorten that cable up there and just get another one when I put the tunnel ram up. So show you that to you when it happens. I appreciate you watching. Leave comments below, and see you later.